Hello, and welcome back to the C.A.P podcast. This is your host, Carma Spence, the Own Your Awesome in Business and Life Coach. And today my guest is Meredith Eisenberg. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about some of the stories that she has shared on her podcast and what inspired her to come to put out the podcast. But ultimately, when it comes right down to it, she wouldn't be doing that podcast if it didn't do something for her as well. So what we're going to talk about now is how do you use that podcast to grow your business? Like maybe attract some leads?
Okay, I would say actually the biggest way that it's grown our business, our list has doubled because of the podcast. And so that is one way. But the biggest way is that we've interviewed nearly 100 people at this point. And 75 of those people are people we didn't know before we interviewed with them.
Right.
So we've grown our network tremendously. And I've gotten invitations to be on other people's podcasts, like this one, it's a trade.
Exactly, because I'm going to be on your show.
Exactly. And so that's part of it, is the network and getting to meet people and getting on people's radar that you never would get on their radar because they're a little further along than you are. Mm-hmm. And yet you get in front of their audience, you get on their radar, they know who you are. And so they can mention you. You now become friends on social media. We set up a Facebook group and we put everybody in the group and then we tweet and post and do everything that our guests, follow them on social media and help promote them once they've been on the show. Right. That cements us even closer. And you never can have too many friends. So that's like the first biggest thing that it's done for us is that. And then the second thing is it kind of gives us a regular content schedule. So we have a twice a week podcast. So no matter what, that goes on Facebook, that goes on our blog. We've just started, since we've cut down our podcast from 5 times a week to 3 times a week to 2 times a week. There's a lesson in that there for you somewhere.
Yeah.
But now that we've done that, we can actually send the podcast episodes out to our email list.
Exactly.
Because before we didn't, I just didn't have the bandwidth to do all of that. But now we can do that. And so that's a regular newsletter that happens twice a week that wasn't happening before.
Exactly.
So it just puts you in a content creation mode. And even better than that, it provides you with a lot of content because, online businesses or online marketing, no matter whether your business is virtual or, brick and mortar, they're hungry monsters. And the food that they eat is content, right?
Right.
And so you have to be constantly producing more content. And so you do that in your podcast.
Exactly.
Because you're interviewing all of these guests. So you have the podcast, you have a blog post that summarizes the podcast, you have you do a video version, you do an audio and a visual. That's 2 more pieces of content. We're taking all of our interviews and putting them together in a book.
Awesome.
That's another piece of content. That's the escape plan book it's in the editing process now. So we looked for things that were in common between all of our interviews. And so we've identified those common threads, come up with an acronym. So ESCAPE actually stands for something.
Right, yes.
And we put it into a book form. So that's still yet another piece of content. You can make classes. You can pick, 3 or 4 interviews that sort of gel together and make them into a class. Something that nobody thinks about doing is once you do a podcast is more like dating, having a podcast, than marrying. Yeah. It isn't till death do you part. And once you commit to a publishing schedule, you don't have to stay with it. But one thing that I've seen a lot and that I'm actually going to start doing is podcast miniseries. Have a season. If you go look on the iTunes New and Notable, you always see that Apple is doing these interview series. Right. So they interview someone and they have 4 or 5 episodes. That's one podcast. It gets up on New and Notable. So then you start up with a new podcast, slightly different topic, and put it up on New and Notable again. And that way it's fair, because otherwise with New and Noteworthy, right, you're on there for 8 weeks and you're done. And if your video, you get to stay up maybe a little bit longer because that's less of a competitive arena right now for podcasts.
Right.
But if you do the mini-series, you can keep going up there again and again and again and again, just with a slightly different twist on the topic each and every time.
Right. Welcome back to the C.A.P podcast. I am your host, Carma Spence, the Own Your Awesome.
You have
Okay.
to do a blooper reel. It'll be funny.
No, this is it's like suddenly I felt like a cat, Oh, there's a fur ball. All right, let's try that again.
Okay.